Hey guys, Spooky Spoonie here, taking a look at comic book Halloween special issues. This one is the Infinite Halloween Special by DC, published in 2007. Okay, so first of all, the title Infinite Halloween comes from their most recent at that time event, which was Infinite Crisis. Down above the barcode, you can see the words Countdown 26. After Infinite Crisis, all of DC titles jumped forward 1 year, and there was branding called 1 Year Later for a few months after. And that's when they started to publish the weekly year-long series called 52. It was showing you what happened during each week of that missing year. 52 started with week 1, week 2, all the way ascending up to week 52, and was immediately followed by another year-long weekly series called Countdown. So the first issue of Countdown was number 51, and then it descended all the way down to number 1. The second weekly series, Countdown, was called simply Countdown for the first about half year or so, and then they revealed that the next big event was going to be called Final Crisis, and so they changed the title of this to Countdown to Final Crisis. Anyways, this was published before they announced the whole Final Crisis thing, which is why it still bears the Infinite Crisis branding. Okay, so starting with the cover, you've got some great artwork by artist Gene Ha. I love the way he incorporated his signature into the Joker's tie on this one. It says there are 13 tales of terror in this issue, and the cover illustration here actually does a pretty good job of conveying the basic plot, which is Joker and some other villains are telling ghost stories. So the first page is the table of contents, and perusing the credits, you can see that there are some big names attached to this. And the name you guys have all been waiting for, David Arquette. So the framing sequence that starts off the book is in Arkham Asylum. All the villains have escaped from their cells and are prepared for a breakout. Joker convinces them that the easiest way to do this would be to wait for the guard change at midnight, and in the meantime, they can tell each other ghost stories. First up is a story called, it's Trick or Treat backwards, because this story involves Zatanna. So the Batman villain Scarecrow, who's known for dosing people with hallucinogenics to bring out extreme states of fear, he tells a story he heard of a gang of criminals who did something similar. They were dosing candy and then giving it out to children on Halloween. Zatanna was at a hospital doing a Halloween magic show for sick kids when a number of children were admitted due to the poison candy. She reads the child's mind to learn what happened. She tracks down the gang, only instead of using illusions to scare them like they did with the children, the things she conjures are more than just images. When the police and paramedics arrive later, they rule that the violence and injuries were caused by a drug-induced hallucination. Before being taken away in an ambulance, Zatanna grabs one of the dosed chocolates and puts it into the man's mouth. One of the other villains cast doubt on the story. Scarecrow assures them that the story is true and that Zatanna is that vengeful. This would be a reference to the mini-event Identity Crisis, where we find out that, especially in the 70s, there were many stories where we didn't see it, but behind the scenes, Zatanna was rewriting people's memories. It originally started off to protect their identities from any villains that discovered who they were, but they ended up using it to almost outright lobotomize some of the characters. Next up is Two-Face with a tale of, in my opinion, DC's last great idea, and that would be David Arquette's The Watchdogs. Okay, so the Watchdogs are a group of vigilantes that can turn into wolves, and they go around stopping crime. Their names and roles in the pack are as follows. First of all, you've got the youngest named Pup. His role is to be a pup. Next, you've got Rufus, who has red hair, so they just call him Red. Next up is Tasha. Because she's a female, she's obviously speedy. You've got Raoul, who's a beta. There's Acalia, who's the mama of the pack. And then there's Alpha, the leader, who just is. The story starts off with a man being cornered in a dead-end alleyway by a talking wolf. The beast lunges at the man, but Alpha swoops down to intercept. The rest of the pack descends then, and they all begin to eat the wolf. After they're done eating, the wolves use a silver safety pin to attach a wanted poster to the dead wolf. By the time Robin and the police arrive later, the wolf is reverted into his human form, and it matches the man on the wanted poster. Enter Detective David Arquette. Now, the character isn't actually named throughout the entire story, he's just referred to as a detective. Clearly, the character was modeled after David Arquette, who co-wrote this story. I'm going to go ahead and say that this is David Arquette, that he is part of the DC universe, and this is canon. Anyways, David Arquette points out that there's a lot of gang warfare in that neighborhood, and it's likely just gang members killing each other off. Robin points out that at each of these scenes, an antique silver safety pin was left behind. Obviously, there's a pattern here. The next day, the pack are hiding in plain sight at the aptly named Full Moon Burgers diner. They're discussing the details of their next target. Pup is confused because he thought he needs a full moon to transform. In the red light district of Gotham, we see a woman get cornered by a pimp. He starts to choke her out when suddenly the pack appears from behind him. The pack transforms to take him down, although the pimp is also a wolf and he transforms, with some amazing dialogue. If I'm gonna get away from these mofos, I better get my canine on. Grrr, oh yeah. Get off me, biatch. I feel like this dialogue directly came from David Arquette. Something just tells me. Robin breaks up the fight, saying this man deserves to face justice for his crimes. The wolves start talking to him, which really freaks him out. After fighting off some of the wolves, Alpha declares that Robin is free to leave with the criminal. He says there's always more criminals to hunt. The next day, Robin delivers the pimp into the hands of Detective David Arquette. Robin tells him about the talking wolves that he fought. He says they feel more like they're vigilantes who are just trying to do the right thing. Obviously, in this universe, David Arquette is a smart, well-respected detective, and he dismisses Robin's claims as being an act of imagination. As David Arquette pulls away from Robin, the criminal notices that they're not heading in the direction of the police station. It's too late for him, though, as David Arquette reveals that he is the mysterious pack leader known as Alpha. The story ends with a message to criminals everywhere. Beware, watchdogs on duty. So yeah, this is obviously one of these classic forgotten heroes type situations. DC has a ton of characters in their archives that don't get used, and I think David Arquette is one of them. I think this story could probably make a pretty good CW show, but I'm just not sure who they'd cast to play David Arquette. David Arquette is a horrible monster. Confirmed. The next story is The Mad Hatter, bringing us a tale of the Red Rain Batman, who was a vampiric Batman. This story starts off with a man, a woman, and their young child at the theater. After the show, they leave and they're walking home. They seem to be stalked by something in the shadows. The thing that stalks them looks like some kind of a demon. First, it snatches the father into the darkness. Next, the mother, whose string of pearls breaks and scatter all around the child. When the child finally looks up, we get a full shot of the horror that is the Red Rain Batman as he is eating the kid's parents. This story very obviously mirrors Batman's origins, where he witnessed his parents being killed as a child. And I think the Red Rain version of him is even kind of makes that connection because he lives the kid alive. The final page tells us that Red Rain's Batman story continues in the Search for Ray Palmer Countdown tie-in series. The next story is told by Phobia. She has fear powers that are similar to Scarecrow's, but whereas his are derived from drugs, hers are natural. She tells the story of a time where she was breaking into Star Labs hoping to steal some advanced technology. Suddenly Lobo crashes through the wall, apparently on the trail of a bounty that has led him directly there. Phobia describes Lobo as the scent of old ham wrapped in leather and left in the sun. Lobo goes wild and starts tearing apart Phobia's henchmen. She begins to project all these horrific monsters and other scary images at him, but he remarks that even death is afraid of him. And this is actually true. Phobia is able to reach some kind of gas or something that amplifies her powers and allows her to finally strike fear into Lobo and chase him away. When they ask what scares Lobo, Phobia says she's going to keep that to herself. But as the reader, we can see he's terrified of an adorable little puppy. Next up is Dr. Destiny with a very Lovecraftian story called Children of the Deep. I like this one because it features the Sword of Atlantis era Aquaman. The characters actually had a lot of good runs in comics, but this is one of my favorite Aquaman eras. Anyways, the story is about three sisters who live in the seaside town of Portsmouth, which is a reference to H.P. Lovecraft's Innsmouth. Their father had died in the ocean, and their mother was unknown. Despite being very beautiful, the sisters had no interest in dating or marrying. One evening, Aquaman emerges from the ocean behind their house. They tell him that they've been noticing him staking them out over the last few weeks and was hoping he would come to talk. The sisters invite Aquaman into their house, where he walks into a trap. It turns out the sister's mother was a Kelpie. Kelpie is a shape-shifting water spirit from Irish and Scottish lore. Anyways, what happened was this Kelpie came on board the ship and seduced their father. The next morning she had disappeared, but she had laid eggs that hatched into the three girls. The girls revealed that they plan on sacrificing him and that his Atlantean blood will help summon their elder god. Before anything can happen, Aquaman smashes the floor, revealing that there's a well under the house that leads to a secret underwater cavern. This is apparently how the girl's mother was able to visit them during the early years of their life. It turns out this wasn't coincidence, though. Aquaman found their underwater cavern some time ago and saw the results of their actions. Apparently the girls had seduced the local men and produced many offspring. Because the children always came out looking like disgusting kelpie fishmen, the sisters would drown the kids in the well. Aquaman takes them to the bottom of the chamber and leaves them to the fate of their cast-off children. The next story is from Victor Zsasz. He's the Batman villain, covered in scars, and he cuts himself every time he kills a new person. Anyways, his story is about the character young Frankenstein, who didn't really do much. As you can see here, he was ripped apart by Black Adam. This took place in a 4-issue mini that spun out of the weekly 52 series. It was called World War III. And it happened because in 52, he had, created a family for himself with his wife Isis and her brother Osiris, and then he was betrayed and they were eaten alive. So he went on a rampage, and a bunch of heroes, including the Teen Titans, who young Frankenstein was on the team at the time, ended up getting just obliterated. Somehow, though, I guess being a Frankenstein creature, he didn't die. All that was left of him was an arm and a head, but that was apparently enough for him to begin to regrow himself. He begins to eat people to increase his mass. Eventually, the arm and the head are reunited, and he's able to regrow the rest of his body. Once he is reformed, he attacks a group of soldiers and takes their pants and boots. After this, he disappears into the ocean, walking around at the bottom. Now, I honestly don't remember much about young Frankenstein. I think it was one of those characters that exists just to kind of get killed. But if you guys know if they followed up on this at all, let me know. Next is the Riddler with a story about Bat-Zaro, who is the sort of Batman equivalent of Superman's Bizarro. I believe he first appeared in a Jeff Loeb Superman Batman issue. The thing with Bizarro is that he kind of speaks in a backwards way. He'll say hello when he's leaving a room and goodbye when he enters a room. Bat-Zaro has that same kind of annoying speech pattern, but with an added twist. Many Batman stories feature him sort of narrating in his head through a series of caption boxes. Bat-Zaro features that, but everything that's in his head he's also saying out loud. So it, for like 2 seconds, it's kind of humorous, like, oh, that's funny that he has no inner monologue. But again, like a lot of Bizarro stuff, it wears thin quickly. So basically, the story is the Riddler takes Lois Lane hostage. Bat-Zaro shows up, creates a big distraction, and Lois Lane is able to save herself. Bizarro then shows up. Him and Bat-Zaro fight off criminals and realize that there's probably something more important they can be doing. The next story is the Steve Niles written one, and it's Poison Ivy telling a tale of when Superman was scared. It starts with Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen down on the docks. They're following up on rumors of weapons smuggling aboard a ship. They sneak aboard, and inside the containers, rather than finding guns, they find zombies. The two are cornered, but Superman hears their cries for help and he arrives. He's overwhelmed by the zombies who are able to take him down surprisingly quickly. Apparently, they're irradiated with kryptonite or empowered by magic. Jimmy points out that these are zombies and they are technically dead, so Superman is able to cut loose. He throws the zombies back into the containers and flies the containers up into space. He leaves them on the surface of the moon. After he leaves, we see that the containers weren't properly locked as an army of zombies begins to spread across the moon. The next story is from who I believe is Clayface, but I'm not 100% sure on that. In this story, we see high school versions of Clark Kent, Lana Lang, and Pete Ross. There's a new kid in town, and Clark points out how difficult it can be to make new friends. Clark suggests that they extend an offer of friendship. The three go to his house to pick up the new kid for a Halloween party, but they find that he's dying on the ground. He claims he was attacked by a manticore. Clark recognizes that the blood the boy is covered in is mouse blood and that this is all a fake. The boy tells them that even though he hasn't actually seen the manticore, his dad did, and he's going to show them where it happened. As they approach a field, they spot something in the ditch. It's a human skeleton. Clark is somewhat familiar with the mythology of the manticore, and points out that it's centered around ancient India and Persia, not Kansas. He also recognizes the skull as being stolen from the high school biology class. After killing a mouse for a prank and stealing the skull from the school, the three don't stop the boy as he storms off alone. As soon as the boy gets far enough away, something attacks him from behind. Turns out to be a real-life manticore. He screams for help, but the others assume it's another prank of his. He's dragged into the woods and is never seen again. The next story is about the Flash, and it is told by Magenta. Magenta is an old girlfriend of the Wally West Flash from when he was in the Teen Titans, and she eventually ended up turning villain. She has magnetic-type powers. This is a story about Wally West, who was the main Flash at the time, and his grandfather. Because we see Flash's kids Iris and Jay there, we know that this is set sometime after Bart Allen was murdered as the Flash, and Wally had to come back. Wally confronts his grandfather about what he's doing there. The last thing he can remember is working on some kind of experiment. It started to overload, and Wally showed up and helped him shut it down. The one thing he couldn't save, though, was his grandfather. Wally's grandfather explains that the experiment in the lab that caused him to seemingly die involved tachyon particles, which are faster than light. He states that rather than dying, he believes the tachyon particles have allowed him to move through time. The brief reunion is cut short when the grandfather must move on. Wally's left with a feeling of contentment, though, knowing that at some point in the future he will see his grandfather again. The next story is about the Blue Devil, and it actually comes from the Blue Devil villain Shockwave. Now, this is set during the Shadow Pact era, where Blue Devil was on a team with other supernatural characters like the Enchantress and Detective Chimp. Blue Devil tells Enchantress about Halloween's when he was young, and he wonders what happened to his friends from back then. Now, this story becomes like Charlie Brown Christmas special gone evil. You've got a balding, middle-aged man named Harley, and his friend in the striped shirt named Dennis. Dennis asks Harley how he could have sacrificed his best friend, and in the bottom of the panel by Dennis's knee we can see a dead dog, i.e. Snoopy. This is to get revenge for all the people that laughed at them. For year after year as children, they sat in the pumpkin patch waiting for the great pumpkin to rise and walk the earth. This year they had found the right magic, though, and Snoopy's sacrifice had allowed them to summon the Pumpkin Sinister. The Blue Devil and Enchantress are relaxing at home when they are attacked by the Pumpkin Sinister. They're caught off guard at first, but are able to recover and destroy the pumpkin. Blue Devil confronts his former friends about why they did this. One Halloween when he was a child, he got a kiss from a scared little red-haired girl. This is the red-haired girl that Harley's been obsessed with for decades. He knocks Harley to the ground, then him and Enchantress leave to get cleaned up. The next story is from Killer Croc, and this is a true story that actually happened to him. At some point in the recent past, Croc had escaped from custody and gone on a murder spree in South Carolina swamps. He's approached by, although this person is never named in the story, sadly, this is Mitch Shelley, the Resurrection Man. Resurrection Man tries to take Croc down with his shock powers, but Croc is able to grab a tree branch and impale him with it. He then rips Resurrection Man apart and begins to eat him. Some point later, his stomach starts to hurt. He starts to vomit up the flesh that he ate and begins to reform. The mound of flesh that is the reformed Resurrection Man appears to eat Killer Croc. We see that Croc escaped though, and he runs towards a gas station pump in an attempt to burn the Resurrection Man off of him. News reports at the scene indicated that not only was Croc burned, but he was also partially digested. We see these news reports coming through on a TV in the bar. A man picks up his hat from the bar, and we see that it's Mitch Shelley, reformed and reintegrated as the Resurrection Man. And in the final framing sequence to end the story, the Joker puts on some kind of demonic face that ends up scaring the rest of the prisoners back to their cells. It turns out that the Joker was being possessed at the time by Boston Brand, the dead man. He used the Joker to keep the villains talking to allow the guards a chance to mobilize and shut down the riot. Before the issue ends, the Joker directly compliments Deadman on such a smart tactic as to stall the villains. Deadman is shocked as he's a ghost and shouldn't be able to be seen, but this is the Joker we're talking about. And finally, there's a little full-page spread, Happy Halloween, from the DCU editorial staff. Unfortunately, aside from Dan DiDio in the front there, I don't really know who any of these people are, or at least can recognize them on sight. So I thought this was actually a pretty good Halloween special. They used the Infinite Crisis branding to kind of sell this as a sort of complimentary book. And I like the fact that all the stories that are going on in there are featuring the sort of contemporary storylines, such as the Sword of Atlantis Aquaman, or the Red Rain Batman story that will directly spin off into the Countdown tie-in miniseries, The Search for Ray Palmer. Most of the stories are pretty good and had kind of a Halloween-y feel. I think the best one in there was definitely the Aquaman one. Like I said, there were a lot of sort of Lovecraft vibes to it, and I really appreciated that. The Zatanna story with the drug candy was pretty good. And then, of course, you have Watchdogs, one of the greatest properties DC has ever come up with. I feel like James Gunn would be smart to include this into like a phase 2 of his DCU plans. Again, I don't know who you want to cast as David Arquette in that movie. I don't know if you want to go so obvious as to cast the actor David Arquette as the DC Comics character David Arquette. But if you guys have any better casting ideas, please share them with me. Anyways, that's it for me. Thanks for watching. Scare you later.